Audiobook Academy. Book Summary. Siddhartha. By Hermann Hesse. Hermann Hesse's Siddhartha was released in 1922 and is one of his best-known works. In 1951, the novel was first published in German before being translated into English. Hesse was inspired to pen Siddhartha after visiting India and falling in love with the mysticism of the subcontinent. Based on the early years of Buddha's life, this brief song tells the story of a father-son connection. Two separate films have been made based on the novel, the most recent of which was a surrealist take in 1971. Even as late as 2014, music and TV series have made allusions to the book's themes and plot points. In the 21st century, its message of peace and enlightenment continues to resonate with people. A man named Siddhartha is the subject of the book, who has been on a quest for enlightenment for most of his life. Prior to the birth of Jesus Christ and during the lifetime of the Buddha, a man named Siddhartha exists in ancient India. Siddhartha leaves his father's Brahmin monastery and joins a group of priests known as the Samanas in search of self-discovery as a young man. Siddhartha and his best buddy Govinda travel to a neighboring city to meet the Buddha, Gautama, after learning that he does not intend to be a Samana. Siddhartha rejects Govinda's invitation to become a disciple of the Buddha. He sets off on his own to a city, where he meets a kind ferryman. As soon as Siddhartha arrives in the city, he is drawn to Kamala, a gorgeous courtesan. In the course of time, Siddhartha becomes a wealthy man thanks to his work for the merchant. In the end, he loses faith in himself and his life and sees it as a hedonistic waste of time. He abruptly leaves town and encounters the ferryman again. Until one day Kamala happens upon Siddhartha and tells him that the young boy she has with her is his son. Siddhartha takes over the care of his son after Kamala's death. Siddhartha learns that he had to let the youngster lead his own life when the boy returns to the city. After recognizing this, he becomes a knowledgeable sage and spends the rest of his life as such. At the beginning of this book, which takes place 6 centuries before Christ's birth, Gautama the Buddha is alive. Brahmins are Hindu priests and instructors, and Siddhartha belongs to this caste. The fact that he has understood the concepts of his faith at such a young age has made Siddhartha's family and friends confident in his greatness. It's expected that his son would carry on the family tradition and become a respected member of the Brahmin community like his father did. Siddhartha, on the other hand, isn't so sure. He is displeased with the current situation of Hinduism in his town. He feels that his father and his peers have studied the religion's knowledge extensively, but he doesn't believe that they have truly gained enlightenment as he believes they should have. Siddhartha ponders whether the religious rites and mantras have devolved into mere custom and tradition rather than a genuine act of worship and a means to enlightenment. As a young Brahmin, Govinda has long been one of Siddhartha's closest confidants and best friends. As a Brahmin in their town, Siddhartha fears that he will have to become a docile follower of the herd and never question authority. Siddhartha, despite his affection for the community and his father, is dissatisfied with his future and can't see living this way. He's never questioned his father or the community before, but now Siddhartha is beginning to wonder if there's more. Shravana tells him that he wishes to join the wandering mendicant priests who journey from town to town and rely on the generosity of the people for their livelihood. They think that enlightenment can only be achieved if one rejects the body and its yearning for pleasure. Siddhartha resolves to seek out the Samanas because he hasn't discovered the enlightenment he was looking for in his own group. Govinda does not like this news and becomes frightened for his friend. Because the Samanas rely on donations to exist, they are typically half-starved and half-clothed. As a result, Govinda interprets this as a sign that he must begin to venture out into the world on his own terms. Siddhartha tells his father of his intentions to join the Samanas and this angers his father who prevents Siddhartha from leaving. Siddhartha resolves to take the tone of polite disobedience and stand, still outside. When his father loses patience with him, he goes away, but not before peering out a window to see whether he is still standing there. For one night and one day, Siddhartha meditates in the open air before his father returns home and notices that he has entered a deep trance. His body is still there, but his mind is somewhere else entirely. Siddhartha's father agrees to allow his son to join the Samanas, but cautions him that if he does not reach enlightenment as he expects he would, he is always welcome back to the family. Siddhartha is astonished to see Govinda accompany him as he prepares to go. The two young men set off in search of the Samanas. It is expected of them to give up their worldly belongings and devote themselves to enlightenment by meditation and fasting when they join the Samanas. Siddhartha is unable to relate to the rest of the world because of this. Outside of his meditation, he begins to believe that everything is an illusion, subject to deterioration, and only capable of causing misery to those who pass through it. It is Siddhartha's primary goal with the samanas to become empty of hunger and desire and all other desires and emotions and to let the ego die. He uses physical suffering as a means of achieving this goal of self-denial. In order to get rid of the agony, he withstands it till the point where he is no longer able to feel it. Even if he is able to see past his pain, he still does not find serenity. He expresses concern to Govinda after spending some time with the samanas that he doesn't feel like he is enlightened yet. Despite their progress, Govinda reassures him that they still have a lot to learn and that it may not feel like it at first. The samanas' way of life turns Siddhartha angry, and he compares it to that of an alcoholic, claiming that both meditation and fasting provide just a fleeting respite from the suffering of existence. It is his declaration that no one can actually learn anything from their doctrines. To paraphrase Siddhartha's words to Govinda, "I'm beginning to believe that this knowledge has no bigger enemy than the man of knowledge, than learning," says Siddhartha to Govinda. The samanas don't have much to teach Siddhartha, so he resolves to go quickly. It's only after he and Govinda hear of Gautama, the Buddha, that he decides to devote his life to spreading the message of peace and enlightenment. Siddhartha is quickly enticed to join Govinda in his quest to find Gautama. Siddhartha is taken aback by his friend's sudden and out-of-character enthusiasm, but he eventually gives in and decides to go on the hunt with him, despite his skepticism about what he may learn from the man. Siddhartha and Govinda are chastised for their lack of effort as they depart the samanas. As a final demonstration of his mastery, Siddhartha hypnotizes the samanas' leader before they depart. In the town of Jetavana, Gautama is staying, according to Siddhartha and Govinda. Even though Gautama isn't dressed like a monk when they arrive in Jetavana, Siddhartha quickly recognizes him from his bearing and voice. Siddhartha and Govinda attend a sermon given by Gautama Buddha, and Govinda immediately declares his desire to become a student of the great man. Siddhartha believes this is admirable, but he acknowledges that he has no intention of joining. Siddhartha tells Govinda that he doesn't want to join Gautama's disciples, even though he didn't find anything wrong with Gautama's teachings. Govinda is disappointed, but he still makes a promise to the disciples on his own, and the next day he says his final goodbyes to a longtime friend. While walking through the woods, Siddhartha bumps into Gautama and inquires about his religious teachings. In Gautama's teachings, he emphasizes the interconnectedness of life and the chain of causation. In spite of his admiration for Gautama's concept of salvation, Siddhartha realizes that it conflicts with his own. If the ultimate goal is to be saved by a god, then the chain is broken and there is no effect. Asked what his ultimate goal was, Gautama said, self-discovery. Because he fears he's offended the man, Siddhartha tries to convince himself that he holds this man in high regard. It's doubtful, however, that simply teaching these practices will result in nirvana for the listener. In order to avoid self-destruction, Siddhartha decides to take his own path and not pretend to obtain nirvana without working for it. Siddhartha has come to terms with the fact that he no longer desires the guidance of an enlightened teacher. He's come to terms with the fact that his quest to discover his authentic self has only resulted in him running away from it. As a substitute for annihilating the ego, he decides to learn from the agony and become his own pupil. After this, Siddhartha notices that he has a new perspective on the real world. A shift in his perspective has allowed him to understand the hidden value in how he experiences the world through his senses. It dawns on Siddhartha that he is not a Brahmin or a Samana, and that he is not destined to be Gautama's disciple. Siddhartha experiences both fear and excitement as he comes to terms with his own solitary existence. He comes to terms with the fact that he doesn't have to return to the Samanas or his father's house. To get away from the metropolis, never longer looking backward, he strides rapidly and discreetly out of the city. A ferryman's hut is the setting for Siddhartha's first night in the second portion of the story. A vivid and delightful dream he has in his sleep is that he is experiencing all of the world's joys. On the following morning, when Siddhartha finds he has no money, the ferryman graciously lets him off the hook for the fare. His inner voice tells Siddhartha to quit having sexual intercourse with the woman he encounters in the surrounding village. Siddhartha heeds the woman's commands and departs. Siddhartha notices a beautiful woman being carried by her attendants in the neighboring town. It is revealed by the residents of the town that Kamala is the name of the prostitute he has promised to meet. As soon as he arrives at her home, Siddhartha approaches her and asks for her help. But Kamala is adamant that she won't agree to this until he has improved his appearance and gotten some money to buy her things. Siddhartha asks Kamala where he may get these things, and she replies by asking him what skills he has. He explains that he is a master of patience, contemplation, and fasting. After a kiss, Kamala instructs him to go see Kamaswami, the merchant, about getting a job. Upon learning that Siddhartha can read and write, Kamaswami offers him employment. By day, Siddhartha works for the merchant in his house, while at night he visits Kamala to learn about love. He considers his time spent with Kamala to be more important than his work with Kamaswami, and that is where he finds the true meaning and purpose of his existence. Siddhartha becomes a successful merchant, but he is more interested in spending time with Kamala than in his profession. Even if he does admire Kamaswami, he recognizes that he has a distinct personality apart from him. Because of his time living as a samana, Siddhartha believes that all of his relationships with other people have been damaged. When he thinks of himself as separate from others, he interprets this as a sign that his genuine self isn't present for his daily activities. It is only when he is with Kamala that he feels like his true self can emerge, and he readily admits that she knows him better than anyone else ever has. He discusses Buddhism and enlightenment with her on a regular basis. While in town for an extended period of time, Siddhartha feels increasingly disconnected from his life's purpose. There are times when he can barely hear his inner voice. There are times when Siddhartha worries whether or not his frequent chats with Buddha are a sign that he still considers himself a samana. After a while, Siddhartha's soul illness of the rich begins to take hold of him. He starts gambling frequently and enjoys it at first because he thinks it's a protest against being affluent, but the thrill of winning quickly takes hold of him and he starts wagering ever larger sums until he becomes hooked to it. At some point throughout the night, Siddhartha becomes aware that Kamala is aging, and this triggers his own irrational fear of dying. The more he tries to forget about it, the sicker and more desperate he becomes. Later that night, Siddhartha has a dream in which he has to toss Kamala's pet songbird's carcass onto the street because it died. Seeing this as a sign that he has lost everything of value, Siddhartha begins to ponder on his life once more. Because of his current lifestyle and belongings, he is worn out and ready for a change. He vanishes without a trace, leaving behind nothing but his clothes and a few belongings. Kamala is grieved, but not surprised, by his leaving. She lets go of her pet songbird and shuts the door on the rest of the world. She learns she's pregnant with Siddhartha's child not long after that. In order to reflect on his life, Siddhartha returns to the river he crossed before. In the midst of contemplating suicide, he hears an enormous from his inner self. Despite realizing that he should not take his own life, Siddhartha is unable to shake the feeling that his life has been a dreadful one, and he falls asleep by a river beneath the night sky. He wakes up the next morning to see Govinda, his old friend, hovering over him. Govinda is taken aback when he first sees Siddhartha, who is dressed in a way that suggests he is a wealthy individual. In the meantime, the two friends talk about their lives before Govinda has to return the Buddha. It was important for him to experience the depths of misery that he nearly took his own life to get there, Siddhartha thinks. To discover his actual self, he must shed all of his previous identities. As soon as the ferryman who transported Siddhartha across the river returns, Siddhartha tells him all about the wonderful life he's been having since then. Vasudeva, the ferryman, approaches Siddhartha and asks if he'd be interested in moving in with him. Living by the river for many years in serenity, Siddhartha is happy to agree with this sentiment. Siddhartha learns about Gautama's impending death many years later, and is overcome with grief. There are other stories of people going to see the Buddha die, but Kamala is the only one who chose to go with her kid. Kamala is bitten by a snake while they are on their way through the wilderness and calls out for aid. She is rescued by Vasudeva and taken back to his hut. Kamala presents Siddhartha to his son once he recognizes her. He has finally found the calm he was looking for and will shortly die, she realizes. Siddhartha keeps his small son with him even if the boy refuses to believe that Siddhartha is his father and act appropriately. His kid is more important to him than anything else, and Siddhartha refuses to send him back to town so that he can be happy at his mother's old house. As a result, Siddhartha is determined that his son would not be a victim of the town like he was. As a father, Siddhartha is concerned that his son will be swayed by the town like he was. In the end, though, the boy flees the scene and never returns. Despite following him, Siddhartha realizes that he cannot stop his son from living the life he wishes to lead and returns unhappily to Vasudeva's house. Siddhartha is virtually numb with grief for the death of his son. A few days later, he decides to go in search of the youngster, but he is immediately deterred by what he takes to be the river laughing at him. Seeing a picture of his father, whom he had abandoned many years previously, he returns to the house. Vasudeva brings Siddhartha back to the river and asks him to listen once more after hearing this narrative. A deep can also be heard when Siddhartha hears the laughing once more, but this time it is joyful. Siddhartha's suffering dissipates in the presence of this sound. He knows that he has finally arrived at a place of common enlightenment. Siddhartha knows that Vasudeva's death signifies that he has become one with all beings. He remains a ferryman and is regarded as a wise man by the people in the area. Govinda returns to see him many years later in search of his sage advice. Siddhartha informs Govinda that he hasn't discovered the enlightenment he was hoping for, and Govinda responds that he's putting too much effort into the search. When Govinda awakes the next morning, he asks Siddhartha for a favor to aid him on his journey. Friend Govinda is instructed by Siddhartha to kiss his forehead and he gets visions of timelessness and unity as a result. Govinda is overcome with emotion and breaks down in tears. The book's protagonist, Siddhartha. While growing up in his father's monastery, young Siddhartha was instructed by the Brahmins to pursue enlightenment by traditional ways. It was a deliberate decision by the author, Hermann Hesse, to name Siddhartha because of two reasons. Because Siddhartha was Gautama Buddha's natal name before he was reincarnated as a bodhisattva. For two reasons. One is that in the Sanskrit language, the word sandha means attainment and urta means what was sought after. Because of this, he who has found the meaning of life is what the two terms mean when used together. Siddhartha is a master of both the Brahmin and the Samana traditions. His ability to hypnotize and meditate at such a young age is proof of this. As a result, Siddhartha feels that he cannot attain enlightenment through either community's teachings. While searching for the right teaching, Siddhartha is subjected to several criticisms and refusals, yet he remains loyal to himself in this way, as he ponders what he truly is. In the end, he is only able to hear his inner voice after letting go of his son and his money. It is around the end of the book that Siddhartha appears to be set to begin taking on disciples of his own. Govinda, Siddhartha's best friend. Often referred to as Siddhartha's shadow or follower, Govinda is Siddhartha's disciple. The doctrines of the groups Govinda adheres to are not questioned by Govinda in the same way that Siddhartha would do. Because he wants to be with Siddhartha, he appears to be just interested in leaving the Brahmins. In this way, he does not take charge of his own destiny, but rather adheres to the advice of others. While there may be cause to question Govinda's religious commitment, there is no reason to question Siddhartha's. Taking on the lives of both a Samana and a Buddha disciple, Govinda endures both until Siddhartha gives him something new to focus on. When Govinda comes to Siddhartha with the difficulty of not yet attaining enlightenment, he shows his devotion to Siddhartha. When Govinda realizes that Siddhartha has reached enlightenment, he promptly takes an apprenticeship with his old friend. A follower by nature, Govinda does not appear to be criticized by Hesse. As a matter of fact, Govinda is demonstrated to be extremely loyal and trustworthy as well as dedicated to a purpose almost to the point of obsession. As a result of his devotion to his friend, Govinda is able to gain insight. Vasudeva, the ferryman who gives Siddhartha free passage across the river into the city. To honor the religion that the novel is about, Vasudeva and Siddhartha's names were based on genuine people. Krishna, the Hindu divinity of wisdom and compassion, inspires the moniker. Vasudeva is the most godlike figure in the book, and he acts with the utmost reverence. When Vasudeva refuses to pay for the ferry passage instead of offering him friendship, Siddhartha is moved. Siddhartha's first stop after abandoning the city's opulent lifestyle is his uncle's residence because of this lasting image. In the same way that Govinda became a follower of the Buddha, Siddhartha falls in love with Vasudeva's peaceful wisdom. Despite this, Siddhartha is not subjected to Vasudeva's extensive teachings. Just listen to the river and learn from it is all he advises him. During this time of contemplation, Siddhartha discovers enlightenment. To Vasudeva, it appears as if Siddhartha has discovered his actual self and that he will soon die. Even though Siddhartha is no longer a ferryman, the other man maintains a lifelong devotion to Siddhartha's river and the wisdom it holds. Kamala, a noble woman in the city who begins to advise Siddhartha in the ways of love. Even if Kamala isn't simply his girlfriend, Siddhartha relies on her as his only source of self-discovery while living in the city for years. Kamala tells Siddhartha to get a job in the city so that he can help him, but she doesn't realize that it will bring him such a crisis of conscience. A snake bite on a visit to see the Gautama Buddha on his deathbed kills Kamala after Siddhartha abandons her and their son for many years. The last time she sees Siddhartha on her deathbed, she knows that he has reached enlightenment and that he dies happy. Hesse was a Swiss author and poet of German ancestry. Many of his stories dealt with the search for one's identity as a young person, particularly as a creative individual, which resonated with younger readers following World War II. In Kolf, Germany, Hesse was born on July 2, 1877. While attending seminary, The son of an ex-missionary was forced to drop out after only a few semesters. After that, he studied extensively to further his education. His debut novel, Peter Camenzind, 1904, was inspired by his job as a bookstore and freelance journalist as a young man. Hesse, a pacifist, relocated to Montagnola, Switzerland, during World War I. In 1923, he was granted Swiss nationality. As a result of his growing sense of hopelessness in the wake of World War I and a string of personal catastrophes, his later books, such as Damien, 1919, Siddhartha, 1922, and Journey to the East, 1923, become increasingly focused on the spiritual quest for new objectives and values. Steppenwolf, Hesse's next novel, was published in 1927 and is often considered to be his most inventive work. He is dragged into a maze of nightmares by the artist and the hero's dual nature as a human and a wolf. Convention and originality are shown to be at odds in the work's title. Hesse was disgusted by the rise of Nazism in Germany and sought to counteract it in his own unique way. He had previously made it clear that he was opposed to anti-Semitism and was married to a Jew. However, he never spoke out against the Nazi Party because he was largely disinterested in politics. Finally, Hesse's utopian future novel Magister Ludi, 1943, provides an answer to the author's problems. A number of volumes of his nostalgic and sorrowful poems have also been released. In 1946, Hesse was awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature. Short stories and watercolors were two of his favorite pastimes in his latter years. At the age of 85, Hesse passed away in Switzerland in 1962 and was laid to rest in the San Abbondio Cemetery in the Swiss town of Montagna. Thank you for listening in Audiobook Academy. Don't forget to subscribe and smash that like button for more content like this. See you in next video.